Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and members. Welcome to this evening Planning Policy Local Plan Committee meeting. Before we start the meeting, there's a fire exit beyond the door behind you, and the assembly point will be in the main foyer where officers will lead you the way. There's no fire drill planned, so if the alarm does sound, it will be real. So get your belongings and make your way to the foyer. Okay, so we go to agenda item 1, which is apologies and substitutions. Keith?
Thank you, Chairman. We received an apology from Councillor Newton, and Councillor Goldman is substituting in her place.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 2 is the minutes of our last meetings. Are you happy for me to sum, Mr. Trigger? Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is a declaration of interest. Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yep, I'd like to declare a pecuniary interest in relation to item 7, please, in the fact that our family own land that's mentioned within the report. Thank you.
Withdraw and...
Sorry, yes, I will withdraw for that item. Yes, thank you.
And if I may suggest, as there's no other items on the agenda, maybe you'd like to go home at early evening after the first item is heard.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 is questions on notice, according to Council Procedure Rule number 38.
We've received no questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. And agenda item 5 is public speaking. Do we have any public speakers?
We've received no note of the public speakers, Chairman.
Thank you. Now, before we go to the first item on the agenda as such, there's been an update that's been circulated, and I was going to cover it in my before we presented the second item, but I will read this out because it's important that it's recorded on the broadcast. The UK General Election 2024 is due to take place on Thursday, 4th of July, and pre-election period began on Saturday, 25th of May. Restrictions on communication apply to all local authorities during this period. From the start of the pre-election period, the Council must comply with restrictions outlined in Section 2 of the Local Government Act 1986. In addition, a Code of Recommended Practice on Local Authority Publicity, published in 2011, makes it clear that particular care should be taken around a period of heightened sensitivity, such as run up to the elections. The Act defines the publicity of any communication in whatever form addressed to the public at large or to a section of the public. It will therefore not be possible to hold the issue and option consultation in June, as the report indicates. Instead, it will be necessary to reschedule the consultation exercise to avoid the pre-election period and minimise any overlap with the summer holiday period, when many people are away and are often unable to engage effectively with consultation. The revised timescale will necessitate further update to the Local Development Scheme, the LDS, which the committee agreed at its meeting on 27th of February 2024, setting out the updated timetable for the local plan review process. This update will be brought forward, will be brought before the committee at a future meeting. So the table on page 55, I think, will be, no, page, okay. It's in the first page of the issues and options. We'll please disregard that because that'll be revised. Okay, so we go to A1, agenda item 6, adoption of the statement of community involvement. This is in the hand of Mr. Will Fuller. Over to you, Will.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. Hello. Members will recall that the statement of community involvement has come to them before the Local Plan Policy Committee in December of last year. At that point, we asked members to allow us to go to consultation for 6 weeks to get the public's views on the draft SCI. Members will recall that the SCI considers the way in which the council will consult on not only planning policy matters, things like the actual local plan itself and development plan documents, but also development management issues, so planning applications in their own right. The consultation took place between the end of January this year and the beginning of March, so for 6 weeks. We did get a very limited number of public representations, which is pretty standard for these kind of documents. The main issues that came up that needed actually addressing were a typo in the document that meant that we didn't make specific reference to the stage 0, so that's the stage kind of before the issues and options part of the local plan. So there is a kind of an informal stage before that, so that's now in there. We also, hang on, I'm checking my notes. Yeah, we also received comments from our colleagues in the development management team who gave us some really good feedback around the up-to-date way that consultations take place in development management. Most of that is a matter directed by national government, but we wanted to illustrate things such as our local validation list that's being amended. So that was that. So yeah, as I say, not many amazing comments were raised. The recommendation for this can be found, which is to adopt the SCI at page 18. The actual amended SCI can be found at page 21, and the table showing all the comments received, all 9 of them, can be found at page 55. So I'm happy to take any comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Will. I must say, it's you could interpret the very few responses from stakeholders as a good thing, because nobody's obviously got any problems with our statement of community involvement. But I've got just a very quick question before I go to members. One is the inclusion of Wivenhoe, Langham and Dedham as consultees on application and other things. I wondered if some consideration has been given to the Suffolk side, Brantham and East Bergholt, because as an example, an application, planning application in Brantham is contributing the highest amount of the 3 to improve the underpass, Mandatory Station underpass. So it's kind of gives you a very good understanding what the links there are, you know. And so what would your comments on that?
Yeah, we'd be happy to add in the Suffolk parishes, and I believe the local authorities themselves are included, but we'd be happy to include those parishes as well. I get your point exactly about Dedham in particular. Dedham, yeah, because yeah, it's close. So yeah, we'd be happy to make that amendment if you like.
Ask them to be reciprocal on that. We will consult them, but for them to consult us at the same time when there are some significant applications that are going on in this Bergholt, and I know that we've not been notified of any of them, which is quite worrying, you know. But okay, members, I got Councillor Fairley and then Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, first point, page 47, you have Colchester Borough Council. It should be Colchester City Council, please. Next point relates to page 32, item 3.2. The last sentence there talks about detailed advice being given from relevant stakeholders such as ECC Heritage. This will be at the applicant's request and will attract an additional fee. I wondered whether it would be possible to add some more clarification into that point. What fee? Who is it from? When is that fee finalised? How does anybody reading this know? So that's one point. Shall I do them all? Yep. Okay, then I'm looking at item, same page, points 3.3 and 3.5 and then 3.8. So you're talking about effective community engagement. I feel that those points are a little mixed in terms of community engagement and what that might actually look like for anyone reading this, and whether any sort of signposts could be given to the reader around a bit of guidance. 3.5, you're talking about major developments, but then you're going back to, for other developments, early engagement and community with the community will be encouraged, which seems to sort of mix a bit with 3.3. So some clarification on there, I think, would be helpful. And then the only other point I have, and you might say it's the wrong place for it, but I'm going to mention it anyway. When you're talking about, there's a table about the nature of development, and there's although they're not to do with tendering district council as such, I think there could be either something in there or a separate paragraph relating to nationally significant infrastructure projects where, you know, we are at the moment, we're looking at Five Estuaries, North Falls, National Grid, and I think it would be helpful to the reader to have some more information on, you know, how those are dealt with, even though it's not TDC.
I think I caught most of them. Thank you, Councillor Fairley. That's, as ever, really, really detailed comments. I'm pleased with that. The point around additional fees for pre-application services from other authorities. In speaking to our development management team, it appears what will happen in the next few months is that there'll be a kind of a combined pre-application service rolled out that kind of includes all those fees in it as well, and it's kind of one set price. But we aren't, I don't think, there yet to actually say this is kind of what that will cost. So I think at the moment it is a bit kind of piecemeal, and you know, Essex County are offering their services for different fees for different parts. So I think that probably will happen, but probably not soon enough for the SCI to make note of it. Your next point was around the national infrastructure projects. Yes, I think we can probably add in a paragraph to that effect, mentioning that, because whilst we aren't a statutory consultee in that process, you know, we are playing a part. So I'm happy to kind of look at that again. And then, yeah, I didn't quite kind of twig that those paragraphs were confused. I'm happy to kind of have a look at that again and see if I can kind of get a bit more clarity in there. Yeah.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Fairley and yourself, Chairman, what you just said involving Brantham, but perhaps maybe ask Baber District Council a little bit further on from Brantham. If you go along the River Stour on that and the other side, perhaps you've got Suffolk Coastal, Felixstowe area, because they're like close to opposite us, even though we're not across the Stour. But yeah, I agree with the comments from the Chairman and Councillor Fairley.
Thank you. Any more points? If there are, I will go to Councillor Fowler and then I'll go to the portfolio holder, Councillor Baker. Councillor Fowler, any comments on the statement?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I have no comments. Once I think those amendments that you've suggested are done, I think it'll be ready to be approved. Provided you ask me to approve it, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So we'll make those changes, and the recommendation is on page 18. Can someone would like to move it? Councillor Cousins and Councillor Scott. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. We now go to agenda item 2. Have a nice early evening, Councillor Fairley. Easy on the line. Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay, so the agenda item 7A2 is the local plan review issues and options. Member will recall that our meeting on 27th of February and on the 2nd of April, we discussed and agreed the updated vision and objectives for the local plan and the high-level spatial option for the long-term housing and employment. The consultation document included 6 options we discussed, which, after our discussion suggestion, we're updating this. They've now been translated into a set of questions for the public to give comments. We've talked about the delay now that's going to be in the consultation, and a revised timetable will be circulated to everyone. It's not envisaged for the consultation to start at least until the late or end of August at the very earliest, because you've got to let people come back from the holidays, and either that or we can start earlier and run it for 8 weeks, but this is matters for the discussion and it's still under reviews, and we'll give an update. So without further ado, I will go to Mr. Paul Woods. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. The purpose of this report is to present the next stage in reviewing our local plan, which is the Issues and Options consultation. The purpose of Issues and Options is to seek the views of local people and other interested parties on the key issues that will be addressed through updating the local plan, and to establish what options might be available to address them. The report itself makes it clear that the Issues and Options consultation document isn't a policy document in itself. It doesn't commit the Council to any particular course of action. Rather, it asks a range of questions to stimulate helpful comments and feedback that will assist us in reviewing and updating the local plan. The Chairman's already mentioned about the update sheet and the fact that the general election will affect our programme somewhat. So we need to delay at least until after the general election has happened. We can't run the consultation in that pre-election period. But as the Chairman also said, it's generally good practice to avoid the summer holidays when running these kind of consultations, so that we give the largest number of people and organisations the best chance to engage with the material, attend any events that we run, and then submit their representation. So the dates that we choose for the consultation, in consultation with the portfolio holder, will need to be after the pre-election period and then later into the summer holiday period, so it minimises that overlap. It doesn't affect the recommendation of the report at all, but it is just important to be aware that references in the report to July and June are now out of date. These changes will also mean we need to update the LDS, as the Chairman also mentioned, but it's worth noting at this stage that although the consultation will be delayed by a few months, work on the local plan review won't stop in the meantime, and so we'll be looking carefully at what work can continue now in order to help the later stages of the local plan process go more smoothly. So the consultation itself for Issues and Options usually would last for 6 weeks, and the main way of reading the document and submitting comments will be through an interactive website through our consultation portal. When people submit their comments online, it's much more efficient for the Council because the information is already held and organised securely. But we know that some people can't or choose not to use the website, and so any comments that we receive in writing will also be accepted, and then officers will log them into the system. We always make hard copies of these documents available at the council offices and also at the libraries around the district, so that nobody should be disadvantaged if they can't get online to read them. We'll need to conduct the consultation in accordance with the SCI that you've just considered, and officers have already been planning how the consultation will be publicised and what the events might be like. The Issues and Options consultation is really the first key stage in the local plan review process, and so reaching as many people as possible is crucial. Once people have responded to this consultation, their details will be in our database, and then we can contact them about the future consultations, so then reaching people is much easier. The Council's communications team have a wealth of experience in dealing with social media and with the local press, and we've been speaking to them about our plans and making sure that we follow best practice around making the publicity meaningful and accessible. The report outlines some of the ways that we'll reach people, but I'd just like to highlight one of those, which is engagement with parish councils. Local councils often have a much greater reach into their respective communities than the district council does, and so we intend to contact them in advance of the consultation and offer them posters and other information that they can make available on their notice boards and in their own parish magazines, so that their residents are given the best opportunity possible to get involved with the local plan. It's normal to hold public events during these consultations so that people can look at the documents in person and ask officers any questions they have. And they can be useful times for providing clarification, but in general, they're much more effective when you have firm proposals to discuss. So if, for example, we plan to allocate new housing in Village A, but not in Village B, it's quite clear where the most meaningful exhibition would be. Whereas at this stage, when we're looking at high-level options and asking questions, rather than presenting proposals, it's a bit less clear where events might be best held. And so what we're proposing is to run a small number of events at this stage in each of the 4 geographic corners of the district, purely to offer the greatest convenience to the greatest number of people. So we're looking at having an event in the northwest of the district around the Manningtree area, one in the northeast around Harwich or Dovercourt, in the southeast around Frinton and Walton, and then in the southwest around Brightlingsea. And that seems to strike a good balance between making officers available to help people understand the consultation without visiting every village in the district at this stage when we don't have any firm proposals to discuss with them. And of course, the consultation materials will all be, they'll all include a postal address, email address, and phone number, so that if people can't get to one of the events, they'll be able to speak to an officer, they can ask their questions, get the clarification they need before they submit their comments to us. So that's an overview of the consultation arrangements. Next, I'll briefly run through the format and the contents of the document itself. So the issues and options document is at Appendix 1 of your report, of your agenda. It begins at page 65. We've tried to retain a sense of familiarity throughout the document for those who have used our adopted local plan. And so the majority of the chapter titles are consistent with the local plan, and the themes follow the same order, with the policies grouped together in a similar way. The introduction chapter is fairly self-explanatory. It sets out the reason for the local plan review, explains the purpose of a local plan for those that are unfamiliar, and explains what this consultation is about and how best to respond. There's a nice graphic on page 68 that sets out the key stages we're aiming for as we progress the review, and that might need updating in light of our new programme. And then page 69 is where our contact details are. So right at the front of the document, we provide contact details for the planning policy team. The second chapter is on page 70, and it sets out the guiding principles that committee members considered at the meeting in December last year. At that time, it was agreed that these principles would be kept under review throughout the process, and so they're set out in full as part of this document, and then that will enable people to comment on them and to help us understand whether any changes or additions to those principles might be necessary at this stage. There's also a brief explanation at the start of the chapter about the approach to Section 1 and the intention that the updated local plan will supersede both Sections 1 and 2 of the adopted local plan. I won't run through all of the guiding principles again tonight, but if we skip forward to page 76, you'll find the first question in the document. They're all in red boxes so that they're easy to find as you flick through. And there we're just seeking comments on the guiding principles and asking whether there are any other principles the Council ought to consider as we go through the local plan review. Chapter 3, likewise, presents something that the committee has considered and approved earlier in the year, which are the updated vision and objectives for the local plan. And we tried some different approaches to presenting these, and we found that a plain text version without the tracked changes that members have seen previously is a bit clearer to understand. So these are the versions of the vision and objectives agreed by the committee members following the meeting in February this year, and it incorporates the changes that were confirmed after the meeting as well. The vision and objectives span quite a few pages, but as you've discussed them in some depth previously, we'll skip forward again to page 84, where we ask just 2 questions about those vision and objectives and whether there are any changes that need to be considered. Chapter 4 is Sustainable Places on page 85, and it's where we talk about future housing growth in the district. And so the chapter begins by setting out the context, the need to plan for more houses because of our extended local plan timeframe. And then it sets out the existing strategy that we have in the adopted local plan, which is all based around the settlement hierarchy. That's the principle of focusing most of the growth in the district to the larger urban settlements, which have the widest range of infrastructure and facilities. So the supporting text here explains each of the tiers in the settlement hierarchy, and then it asks relevant questions about them. So for the strategic urban settlements on page 86, we ask whether these larger settlements should continue to be the focus for growth, or whether any other settlements should be included. And we link forward to the 6 options that members considered at the last meeting, which are set out in a few pages' time. And we do that by asking whether Harwich and Dovercourt, for example, could accommodate an increase in housing between 2033 and 2041. And over the subsequent pages, we look at each of the other tiers of the settlement hierarchy: the smaller urban settlements, the rural service centres, and the smaller rural settlements. And we ask at each stage whether there are any changes that could be made, and then link forward to the 6 options where it's relevant. For example, asking about growth around villages with railway stations, which is one of the options members considered. And then on the second half of page 90, that's where we introduce the idea of considering options for a new spatial strategy. And from page 91, we set out the 6 strategic options the committee discussed in April, taking into account the requests from the last meeting to make some of the specific benefits of each option clearer in the headline section. And these take up quite a few pages. They run through till page 108. But the maps and the thrust of each of those options are the same as members considered back in April. So I won't repeat those tonight, but if we move forward to page 108, you can get a flavour of the questions that are asked about each options, whether there are any additional advantages and disadvantages to each of them. And then one additional question at the end, whether there is an alternative option beyond those set out in 1 to 6 that the council should consider as part of the local plan review. Then at page 109, we start looking at settlement development boundaries and the wording in that policy. We ask whether that wording should be strengthened to make it clear that development outside of these boundaries will generally not be supported. And then we pick up the policy around sustainable design. And this one has a particularly open question attached to it, asking whether there are any ways that the policy could be improved to secure better quality design. And this approach of asking open questions is one we've tried to incorporate throughout the subsequent chapters of the document. Turning over to chapter 5 is healthy places. And it looks at the policies around open spaces and helping people to live healthy lifestyles. And the text explains the important role of planning on promoting physical activity when we're designing new places. There are a suite of policies in the local plan that look at open spaces, green infrastructure, and sports and recreation facilities. And these are spoken about over the next few pages, highlighting good practice and new national guidance that's become available, and looking at the possibility of introducing a higher level of protection in the local plan for some specific green spaces in the district. We then go on to talking about community facilities, and then cemeteries, crematoriums, and burial sites. And at each stage, we ask similar broadly open questions to try to stimulate thoughts and ideas from members of the public and other stakeholders about how these policies could be reviewed. Chapter 6 is called Living Places, and that reflects the topics that are covered in that part of the adopted local plan. We covered housing supply in more depth in an earlier chapter of the document, and so we move quickly on to housing choice and promoting a mix and a variety of new housing. Again, using that open question. And then likewise with layout and density, the document explains the background to the existing policies and then asks questions about how they might be improved or the scope widened to include new national guidance. We introduce an idea in this section around density and discuss a little bit about whether, in light of the number of homes we're going to have to plan for, whether a departure from the general pattern of low density development we see across the district might be appropriate in some places. So by allowing very well designed high density developments in strategic locations, not only can we better access the services and facilities within walking distance, but we can also seek to minimise the loss of agricultural land while meeting the same housing need. But this isn't a policy position, and it doesn't commit the council to any course of action. Instead, that text is intended to invite discussion and feedback about something that has been seen to be quite effective elsewhere in the country. Then across the next pages, we look at different kinds of housing needs, so affordable housing, self-build and custom house building, gypsy and traveller accommodation, and other accommodations such as care and assisted living, HMOs and bedsits. Under each of those headings, respectively, there's a small amount of explanation about the current policy position, and then some open questions about how the local plan review could consider these areas. Chapter 7 is Prosperous Places. It looks at the policies relating to the local economy. It discusses retail and town centres, employment sites with a focus on the Freeport status in accordance with the guiding principles, tourism, and the rural economy. And again, each section, it sets out a little bit of background information about the current policies and then asks key questions to stimulate ideas and discussion. Chapter 8 is on page 125 of your agenda. It's called Protected Places. And there are two broad areas here, protecting the natural environment and protecting the historic environment. So we begin with the natural environment. We look at climate change and carbon emissions and ask what more the local plan could do to address these challenges. The text discusses national targets for carbon emissions as well as local targets that have been set at the county level, and also the ever-changing nature of technology and the measures that are available to us to both lower emissions and to mitigate against the impact of climate change. And closely linked is biodiversity and nature recovery. And again, there's some explanation around national policy, and particularly around the legislation around biodiversity net gain, and the aspiration at the county level to secure habitat improvements to go above the national minimum. We also set out how it's important for nature sites to be connected and integrated in order to work effectively and to thrive. And a lot of these themes are closely linked with the policies mentioned around green spaces and active lifestyles. And so in order to avoid confusion and try to separate that overlap, we've tried to keep the two overlapping topics as separate as possible in the questions here. But we do acknowledge there are overlaps between green spaces for nature and green spaces for people to use. Also under that banner of the natural environment, we talk about flood risk, the coastal protection belt and the rural landscape. And they're all policies that are generally working well. And when we brought them to you in December, when we did that high-level analysis of each of the local plan policies, they're ones that we thought wouldn't need much in the way of updating. And so we asked broad questions about whether there are any amendments that should be considered. And similarly, for strategic green gaps, one of the guiding principles of the local plan review is not to reduce them, and the evidence that supports them is quite up to date and it's recent, and so the broad questions are quite appropriate in this section as well. And then the historic environment. We talk a little bit about the extensive work that's been undertaken in reviewing the district's 20 conservation areas and how the policies here are generally working well in practice. And so we just ask again whether there is anything more the local plan should do to preserve and enhance our historic environment. The penultimate chapter talks about infrastructure delivery and begins by highlighting the fact that many of the issues discussed in those chapters of the local plan have actually been addressed earlier in this document. And so they're not repeated, but there's some commentary around the importance of transport infrastructure, the need for transport modelling as part of the local plan process, and then it asks some focused questions around improving the use of sustainable modes of transport when considering new developments. And of course, we've got another open question to ask whether there's any other changes to policies around infrastructure delivery that we should consider. And then finally, on page 134 of your agendas, we have two catch-all questions that give the opportunity to mention anything else that hasn't been covered in the rest of the document. We might find there are comments that come in here that do actually apply elsewhere in the document, but if there's any new or interesting ideas that could come forward, this is the opportunity to do so. Now, it's taken us quite a while just to go through a whistle-stop tour of the document, and it's necessarily a very long document to cover all the issues in an appropriate level of depth. But generally what we find is that people will flip to the issues that are most important to them. And so a clear table of contents at the start of the printed version will be important. But on the interactive website, there'll be a menu available on each page that means you can navigate to the part of the document that you're most interested in nice and quickly. And then the questions themselves that are read in this document will have a little comment box on the side of the page, which should help people to navigate to where they're. There we go. Of course, there will be people who choose to answer all 81 questions in the document, but we fully expect the majority of people will pick the areas they're most interested in and speak to us about those. So that is the issues and options consultation document, the consultation arrangements that we're proposing, now for the end of the summer rather than for the next month. And so I'll hand back to the Chairman for the recommendation, which can be found on page 58 of your agenda.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, for your presentation and taking us through the sets of questions on there. Before I go to members, I've got an observation really. The four events that are planned in the 4 different quadrants of the district, it would be quite good to kind of, when we do publicise them, that the locations not been chosen because they're likely to get some developments on there, but just for purely geographical reasons. You know, it's quite important if we make that point, just in case we don't want to set hairs running and get people to get the wrong idea. But besides that, I think it's, officers have produced an excellent sets of questions there and collated all our work so far into what looks like a small document, but really I know how much work has gone into that. So I'll open it to members for any comments. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you remind me why Brightlingsea was not put under the seaside towns? And going on to that a little bit with the tourism, seeing that Brightlingsea hosts the Olympic Championships, we've got the world-class Mirror Dinghy Championships on the sailing side. We host so many big championships on sailing, and yet there's very little publicity. To me, it should be under a seaside town and it should be there to promote the tourism, because it's not just a few people who come in. The next sailing championship, which I think is July, we've got 2,000 visitors coming in. So, you know, where really is Brightlingsea sitting under the tourism and the seaside towns?
That's it.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. So the approach that was taken to the vision and objectives in our current plan really highlighted those coastal seaside towns really on the east coast, and then covered everything else, including Brightlingsea, including the villages in the heartland of the district, Manningtree and Mistley area, as part of the wider rural heartland. But that's not to take anything away from Brightlingsea importance in terms of its coastal location, maritime history, and the contribution that it makes towards tourism. When we brought this revised, updated version of the vision objectives forward for the committee's consideration a couple of meetings back, it was on the understanding that for the purpose of the local plan review, we would be looking to update rather than rewrite the vision. But of course, through the consultation that we look to undertake, if there is a strong view coming back that actually Brightlingsea needs to be presented through the vision in a way which is perhaps more reflective of how the community feel it should be done, of course we can take that on board through the consultation. But as a starting point for this local plan review, we've carried forward the basic principle, which was to bring forward what we had last time, update it as necessary, but bearing in mind the things that you've mentioned, Councillor Chapman, I think when we do eventually go out to consultation, if we get those messages back from our communities, that's something we'll take on board.
I think you'll get them back.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Did you have any points or question for officers? No? Okay, got Councillor Cassens and then Councillor Scott next.
I was going to say, mine's almost an observation, but there is a question in it as well. I mean, it's a very, very good document, and you know, I'm already thinking of my answers for a lot of the questions. But how do we encourage? Right, that sounds better. How do we encourage positive engagement? Because I think, you know, I never studied it before to see, but how many comments come in that are actually giving positive suggestions to how we might expand on our local plan, and as a balance to, you know, what normally happens is not in my backyard, so you get lots and lots of negative comments, well, I don't want this in my area. But how do we encourage the positive? Because you can see it at chairing planning meetings at town council level, for instance. You'll have members saying, well, I can't possibly comment on this because it's not in my ward. I'll leave it to the ward members. But sometimes, I mean, we're making our start of where new housing goes as to what we've always traditionally done in tendering. And it tends to send all the housing to the coast. We've got very little in the middle. Everything's out to the coast. And, you know, I sort of start to think about, you know, the environment, and you know, you could argue that perhaps putting all the housing, you know, the first sort of yard you go into tendering would be probably the greenest thing you could do, because you're not burning lots of fuel up to get to the coast. But how do we actually encourage positive comments, even if it involves talking about someone else's area, as that might be the best option? Because equally, do we want to send everything out to the coast where we've always sent it, because that's where virtually all our big populations are? But equally, we don't necessarily want to ruin what we're actually proud of, you know, the rural parts, you know, the Oakleys and the rural parts of our area, by actually sort of starting to spread development out. But I just want to know how we encourage positive thought of how we may do things differently.
Who wants to get that, Paul or Gary? Paul, yep.
Thank you, Councillor Cousins. That's a very big question about how you get people to engage more positively with the planning system as a whole. With regards to this particular consultation, my colleagues and I have thought very carefully about how we frame the questions that we ask throughout the document, and we make it clear, particularly through the website, that you need to answer a question. You need to set out which question you're answering. So if it's about the Healthy Places chapter, there are specific questions asking for positive suggestions, rather than frame the questions in a negative ways or what is wrong with our current policies. But of course, people will want to submit their thoughts as well, and so there'll be the opportunity to do that. But I think the messaging around how we promote this consultation, what kind of publicity we do, particularly with regards to the press release and the supporting wording on the website, to make it clear that people have got an opportunity to shape the future of the district, rather than just trying to resist or trying to stop development. There's opportunities to try to make the place they live and work in better. That will also flow through to the communication we have with the parish councils as well, and we'll really try to emphasise the opportunity that's available to them and their residents to engage positively with the consultation. I think it's inevitable that people will use it as an opportunity to moan about forms of development, to moan about the way the council's approaching the local plan review. But I do think that the questions that we've proposed do lead people to think more positively about how we could improve the district, what might be the most suitable strategy for growth, and to really seize the opportunity to shape this local plan for the next 20 years. Also, it's important to consider that it's been about 10 years since we've ran an issues and options consultation, which is as open and as broad as this one is. As you go through the local plan process, that's when you start to have policies and proposals that people can take a view upon, and they can either be in favour of or object to. And that's generally then when you start to see people really digging in their heels and being for or against something. But at this stage, we haven't done this for about 10 years, where we've just opened it up to those very broad questions to ask what people's views are about these policy areas. I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's sort of my initial thoughts really about how to encourage positive consultation.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's an excellent answer, because I had actually read this document. I think it's a good document, and I think the questions are in a positive nature, and I think, you know, it's nice to actually hear it go out on the recording, you know, to encourage people to actually come forward to help shape things for the better. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Custer. I think it might be worth mentioning a couple of things there. The previous item on the community involvement, on page 59, it talked about, I think that's the first time we've actually encouraging district councils to be ambassadors really of what we're trying to do, because the way we have chosen to review our local plan, and reason why the timescale is so tight is because by doing it this way, we can limit the numbers of dwellings that we have to provide. If we wait, however, until the full planning reforms come in, the numbers will be far higher than what we might be. We still don't know what the numbers are going to be, by the way, and so therefore that's something positive that's up to us to communicate to people, for engage with this in a positive way. Otherwise, you get double the numbers if we don't. Councillor Casson, you come back.
I was going to say, you raised something else almost that I meant to mention before, is that I do think that as district councillors we have got that opportunity, but unfortunately we're all individuals as well, and we look at 6 options in front of us, and I can see, you know, those that I would be wanting to push and support, but, you know, people would say, well, it's because you don't want it in your backyard, but, you know, I think you can argue that quite positively, and I think you can. I think we did talk about, you know, adding more, you know, meat to the bones of what the, you know, opportunities may be out of going down certain options, and I think that's where, you know, I think district councillors can be involved, but I think, you know, it may not all be pushing the same option, but I think anything that gets people talking about it in a positive way, and actually suggesting, you know, what some of the positives could be from a different option than's being suggested, it will be good. So I think you've actually hit, you know, what I was perhaps going to say previously. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I totally agree with the comments from Councillor Cousins. Couple of comments I'd like to ask is on page 131, it mentions about connected places and delivering infrastructure, education, primary and local small primary school education. At the moment, as in the rural areas, there are issues with parents trying to get their child into a primary school where they have to travel a fair distance to take their child to the nearest primary school, and all the primary schools are full. We're not the education authority, but going forward, I suspect you will get comments from the general public in the rurals in terms of primary school education. And it's affecting several villages in TDC area where people have to travel far distance, even into another local area, Colchester City Council or Baber District Council areas, just to take their child to school, then pick them up in the day. So we really need to connect with Essex County Council and make sure that people out there can put their views about primary school education. The other comment I want to make is there are some communities in our district where the elderly folk who want to downsize their house from a 4-bed house, and sadly their partner's husband and wife has passed away and they want to downsize. And in Ulster Market they have an area called Meadow Close, small community within a community for pensioners who want to live in the village, who have their friends are in the village, their social interaction, clubs, groups, societies and all that in their community, they want to be involved.
We've got some gremlins on the microphone.
I was going to say, it would be interesting if we can possibly have a policy or something to look in having small-scale developments for the purpose of elderly people who want to downsize, say 45 houses, like in Meadow Close in Elmsford, there's about 45 houses there for the purpose of elderly people who want to live in the community still, downsize their house. But at the same time, it would also free up 4- and 5-bed houses in our district to have younger families moving in who've got maybe teenage kids already and move into the rurals. And it helps both people, elderly and younger families in the rurals, and it secures elderly people to stay in the community where they know their friends are, where their social interactions are, and that's I'd like to see something in the policy going forward down the line. Thank you, Chairman.
Would you like to pick up those 2 points, Paul?
Thank you, Councillor Scott. 2 very good points. Picking up your first point about education provision, particularly around primary schools in rural villages. It is a challenge because especially in smaller villages where we would probably be looking to allocate for a smaller number of housing growth, you then struggle to get the critical mass to have the expansion needed at a primary school to have another form of intake, for example. Just in recent weeks, we had a really productive meeting with colleagues at Essex County Council and the Education Authority, looking at the current state of affairs with regards to education provision across the district, and understanding what scales of development might be needed in certain parts of the district to trigger the need for another intake with a primary school. Building a new primary school is a bit trickier still, because the Department for Education, their policy requirement is that if you build a new primary school, it has to have 2 forms of entry. So you can't build a brand new small primary school, it needs to be a large primary school from the outset. And so they're tricky considerations, particularly when we're looking at allocating the number of housing sites that we might be looking to allocate. But it is something that we're having early conversations with the Education Authority already to understand how the 6 options that members have considered before, how they might work in terms of education provision, and what that critical mass might be in certain locations in order to facilitate growth at the right primary schools. But it is something that we're very aware of in our team, and something that we're having ongoing conversations with colleagues at Essex County Council about. Moving on to elderly people and their desire to downsize, it's not something that we've got a specific policy on in the local plan at the moment, but that's not to say that it precludes those kind of developments coming forward. You mentioned that there is one already in Elmstead Market. As part of the local plan review, one of the pieces of evidence that we need to produce is the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, so it's the SHMAR, we call it for short, and that looks at what the breakdown of different housing needs are in the district, so what the need is for elderly people, for young families, for single people in different parts of the district. And as part of that, we'll get a much clearer understanding of whether there is a need in particular areas for retirement accommodation, and how best we might be able to support those to come forward within the local plan. I believe if we look at a question in the Issues and Options document, question 56, underneath the Care, Assisted Living, HMO and Bedsits chapter, it's on page 121 of your agenda. And the question there asks, what more could the council do to ensure the local plan meets the needs of people requiring specialist accommodation in the district? And so particularly around those communities, those sort of intentional communities for elderly people that you mentioned, that's certainly something that we would be looking for feedback on in that part of the consultation document. We're still working through our call for site submissions at the moment, and understanding which of those areas might be suitable for that kind of accommodation is something that will be in our minds as well.
Can I just say thank you, Chairman, thank you for the officer to come back and answer my 2 questions. It's a really good report, and thank you for taking the time to answer those 2 points.
Councillor Bush, next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Woods. A very sort of comprehensive report, recommendations, and what's been produced for this consultation. But it's pertinent, really. The conversation we've already had tonight is around communication engagement. We've already seen lots of questions already being raised, which is great. Just within this room, they're already stimulating that. For me, what I look at is connectivity, and I go to the last section, connected places and delivery, and the whole district is depending on it. And I understand that we have certain key areas, whether it's the Harwich, Clacton and Frinton, where we've got the bigger populace. But the rural areas really are sitting in the heartland, which is probably disconnected. And I think when we look going future, when we consider now the Freeport and possibly the garden communities, we're looking at such a diverse and impacting in the whole of this district. And living in the rurals, we are isolated. And connectivity is important to get to the towns for business. So I'm very encouraged by the pre-engagement is to actually send posters and communicate with all these parishes, these 17 parishes, whether they are in a district, to advise them. It may not directly impact them because of the developments outside it, but indirectly it probably will.
They probably have families that want to live there. They might be commuting there to work. So it is important that we get that engagement, some very front-end engagement on that. And I understand you can't be running events in every parish around their cost and time. But I think we really, and it's already been raised earlier this evening, is that the ward councillors do have a role to play into actually, when we get raised with that, but we can only raise the responses to our residents if they've seen that information front end of what may be coming down the line, so we can help that. So that's one thing. You can't underestimate the importance, and that's the question I'm asking. We really need to focus in our media and the way we communicate going forward with this. We've got a short space of time. We need to really impact on that in the events that we circulate, so we can make certain that if people really feel that they need to understand more about what's happening in the district for the future, they can go and visit these sites. But again, don't underestimate the connectivity, because I think this is the lifeblood from us. It can connect the north, the south, the east and the west, and everybody should be involved with that. And that's really the question I'm asking, that we can actually get a programme together to actually achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bush. The general election has made our lives harder in quite a few different ways with regards to the local plan programme, but what it does do is allow us a bit of extra time in the lead into this particular consultation to engage, particularly with the parish councils and with ward members as well. So rather than looking to launch this consultation in the next couple of weeks, we've now got a good month or two that we can begin that communication and say, you know, this consultation is coming down the line. Here are some posters, here are some templates for leaflets, here's some text that you could put on your in your magazine or on your own social media or websites to reach the people in your particular area of the district, and particularly in the rural locations. I think that kind of engagement is going to be crucial. We have been looking at other ways of reaching to people, and so obviously we've got the website and social media, which is great for certain demographics. We generally do a press release to the local newspapers, and that's been really effective, more so than putting in a notice in the sort of the notices page somewhere near the back. By having a press release, you know, you have your opportunity to have a say on the future growth in the district. It can be framed in a slightly controversial way sometimes, and it garners interest and it sort of stimulates people's attention. And so that's something that's going to be really important, making sure that we don't just rely on digital techniques to reach people, but sort of the old-fashioned ways, if you like, in the press and posters on village notice boards and in the parish magazines. So I think the time is an advantage for us now that we can start those conversations early with parishes, get notification out to ward members before the consultation starts, so that they've got time to sort of mobilise their resources to make sure people are aware that this is happening.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Woods. Yeah, the thing I wanted to come back with as well, we've carried out in our rurals for various different reasons from the RCCE and support from tendering to carry out surveys of housing requirements and needs in the rurals. And it's quite astonishing, really. There are a lot of families that want to stay within that and they can't find anywhere else to stay, so they're moving out. So when we say it's a negativity, people don't want houses built in their rural gardens. You know, to some extent it's a myth, because some people welcome that because they want to keep their families together, and that's not wrong. So again, that's why important is the communication. If we've got areas we want to do that. So that's just another thing I want to throw into the pot, really, to consider how we sort of sell that sort of positivity to certain areas which feel like they're intruding in their villages, because some people actually feel it might be important. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right. That's very important, and just reminds me of the point that Councillor Cousins was making as well around trying to get positive engagement with the consultation, particularly around those 6 options for spatial growth. The questions under each of those options are there any other advantages that you can think of, and are there any other disadvantages that you can think of? And so rather than just saying, you know, tell us what you think about these, we've been quite intentional asking people to think about what the advantages of those different strategies are, and there's a number that do show growth, limited amount of growth in some of the rural areas in the district, and so we're really hoping that we will get some really positive engagement, people explaining what kind of housing they want to see in their communities, what would be beneficial to them and their families. No, that's a really important point, and we're hoping to get that kind of feedback through the consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. Before I go state something, I just wanted to say what an excellent report. It's interesting to read, and so many reports are not interesting. So that was a good report. You were talking about the posters and engaging parish councils and things. Will you send a template or a poster to each one of us as ward councillors? Because we've got a window in our parish council, but that's the only place they would put it. I've got a shop in the town centre. Gary is also chairman of another shop opposite me with big windows. We can, if you look in my shop window, it's full of posters, but people know where to come to look. So if we could have either a poster or a template or something that we can get out there with now or within the next, few days, weeks, we can start pushing that ourselves. Quite happy to copy more of them and put them up the high street, and so, which I think is the best form, because press release, okay, how many people read a newspaper now? And I'm a newsagent's daughter, so I know the facts on that one. So, yeah, I think if you can get the posters, they read them in the shop windows, and then we'll just spread them all around our areas.
There's an offer you can't refuse, isn't it?
No, that's a very good idea. So yeah, we'll make sure that any communication that goes out to district councillors, in addition to the parish councils, that we'll make sure those posters are made available so that they can be distributed far and wide. That's fantastic.
I don't have any other members indicate wanting to speak, so I will go to Councillor Fowler and Councillor Baker. But I just would like to make sure that Gary is already preparing a letter to the new, whoever the Secretary of State is going to be, to make sure to extend the June 25 deadline, because that's very important. It's not our fault. That's
Thank you. Yes, I mean that June 25 cut-off date for authorities that are progressing their review under the current arrangements looks increasingly tight all of the time, and particularly because, of course, it's a summer general election and that has an impact on when we could run the consultation. But of course we won't be the only authority in that boat, and I'm very conscious of the fact that I think the Planning Inspectorate has been contacting authorities to ascertain whether they're going under the current rules or intended to go on the new rules, because I suspect there'll be a lot of local plans arriving with the Secretary of State and the Planning Inspectorate come June 2025. Now, of course, we're in a position where it's not appropriate for me to write to MPs, but following the election, it would be my intention to reach out to the MPs to see if anything can be done about that particular cut-off date, because of course we're working very hard to move this thing forward with a lot of momentum behind it, and it would be a shame if for whatever reason the cut-off date precluded us from getting a positive result on our local plan.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Fowler, any points you'd like to raise?
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, well done to the planning policy team on an excellent piece of work. It's a very good consultation document, and much as Councillor Chapman has just said about getting stuff out there, the same in the Harwich area as well. There's plenty of places there where those who don't do social media give us a poster in the window. So yes, very good. Other than that, that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Before I go to Councillor Baker, it'd be very, very good if, and I'm sure the committee will agree with me, if maybe an old-fashioned workshop could be held for members as opposed to do a non-members briefing online. I think this deserves something a bit more face-to-face, and with something for us. If we want to engage members, I think there will be something big, quite positive. So on that note, I'll come to you, Councillor Baker.
A topic for conversation with myself and Mr. Guyver on Monday then about that. Very interesting debate. There's obviously going to be at least two councillors are going to be putting comments on the questions, and rightly so. Mr. Guyver's answered one of mine, is what impact on the timeline? Has a huge impact, doesn't it? So, but we will get there and we'll see how we do. Just picking up on what others have said about we as district councillors have a responsibility. Myself, Councillor Goldman, we don't have a parish or town council. So there are 19, I think, councillors in the district. We do not have a parish or town council. We have residents associations and other things. So it's vitally important that we, as those councillors, engage with whichever organisations that we have contact with to make sure that they engage with it, whether that's the voluntary sector or everything else. Excellent document, as always. Excellent briefing as well, and I think it covers everything. And what I would say or would ask is, obviously this document is in the public domain. That doesn't stop people actually commenting now, does it? So yes, we're going to go out to consultation later than we would like, but people can still comment. People can read this document and still comment, and the website may not be up and running, and the consultation part, but they can always email in, write in, telephone, come and visit, whatever they wish to do. But yes, I think it's excellent, and we need to encourage as many people as possible. It's vitally important that we have this. I mean, how long did it take us to get the local plan into place? Let's make sure we get the right review done and move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. We did have the mat taken out from under our feet several times in the past, but we, as you say, we did manage to get there. Okay, members, I don't have any further questions. So the recommendation is on page 58. There hasn't been any suggested changes to the questions, besides just highlighting the exhibition things are purely geographical or not for any other purposes. Would anyone like to move? Councillor Bush, you moved it from it, and Councillor Chapman, you seconded it. Go to the vote. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous again. Thank you very much indeed, members. That brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. If anything decided on the timetable, I'm sure that'll be circulated to the members of the committee. Thank you very much for your attendance.